When Claire Jensen, a skilled mechanic, uncovered an old, rusted vault hidden in the middle of a forgotten military base, she thought she was simply stumbling upon another relic of the past. But as the heavy steel door creaked open, the sight inside was unlike anything she could have imagined. Stacked crates marked with Section 7, rows of old surveillance equipment, and an array of gadgets that hadn't seen the light of day since the Cold War. The vault was a time capsule of secrets. Secrets that, if exposed, could change history. But as Claire took the first step into the vault, she had no idea just how much danger her discovery would bring. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, let us know where you're tuning in from. And if stories of hidden secrets and unexpected discoveries excite you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode will uncover even darker mysteries. Claire wiped the sweat off her brow as the late afternoon sun beat down on the military base. The land was overgrown with grass and weeds, the cracks in the pavement long forgotten. She had been here dozens of times before, scavenging through the abandoned airfields for parts and old equipment. It was a routine that kept her grounded, both literally and figuratively. But today was different. She had wandered further than usual, curiosity tugging at her feet, as she followed an old dirt path behind a cluster of derelict hangars. It wasn't much to look at, just a stretch of concrete buried under years of neglect. But something caught her eye, a slight gleam beneath the dirt, something that didn't belong. A small, circular steel door was barely visible, half buried under decades of grime and dirt. Claire knelt down, brushing away the dust with her gloved hands. The metal felt unnaturally cold, even for something abandoned. She ran her fingers along the edge, the faintest outline of a seam visible now. No handle, no keyhole. Just a faded emblem in yellow that read, "Authorized personnel only." Her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just any forgotten scrap. It was something deliberately hidden. "Section 7, she whispered, reading the words stamped across the door in faded military-grade paint. The name was familiar, but she couldn't place where she'd seen it before. Maybe it was a code name, a project lost to time. Maybe it was something more. After a moment's hesitation, she stood up, scanning her surroundings. The silence of the abandoned base pressed in on her, but the pull of the mystery was too strong. Claire couldn't just leave it there. She grabbed the crowbar she'd been carrying and pried it into the edge of the door. It resisted at first, the rust clinging to its hinges, but after a few firm tugs, the door gave way with a groan. Claire's breath caught as the heavy steel creaked open, revealing what lay inside. The faint blue light from the setting sun filtered in, casting an eerie glow on what she now saw: rows of equipment, old computers, radios, and screens that looked as though they hadn't been touched in decades. The place smelled musty, a mix of dust and something metallic, something far older. And there, stacked in the corner, were crates, large green military crates, labeled with Section 7 in bold letters. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw something even more startling. A row of surveillance cameras, wires snaking across the floor, their lenses still gleaming in the blue light. A cold wave of realization washed over her. This wasn't just junk. It was a treasure trove of Cold War-era spy equipment, and it had been hidden here for a reason. Claire stepped inside, her mind racing with possibilities. What had she stumbled upon? What was the significance of these tools? The secrets they held could be worth millions. But just as quickly, the thought crossed her mind: was she ready to face whatever danger this discovery might bring? As the door swung shut behind her, Claire knew one thing for certain. Her life was about to change. Claire's boots echoed in the silent vault as she stepped further inside, her eyes scanning the rows of forgotten equipment. The stale air was thick with dust and the scent of rusted metal, but there was something more, a sense of old memories, hidden for decades. The vault was crammed with outdated computers, surveillance equipment, and long-forgotten military gear. The dim light, filtering through the cracks in the door, illuminated crates stacked high against the walls, each marked with the same ominous label, Section 7. She hadn't expected to find anything this significant when she first stumbled across the vault's entrance. It had been just another stop on her routine search of abandoned military sites. But now, standing in front of these crates and the eerie equipment, Claire realized this discovery was no accident. This was no ordinary collection of scrap metal. It was a vault of secrets. Claire wiped the sweat from her brow, her heartbeat thudding in her chest. She approached one of the crates, the label still clear despite the years of neglect. The seal was rusted, but with a little effort, she managed to pry it open. As the lid groaned, Claire's eyes widened at the sight inside. Neatly stacked inside the crate were dozens of devices she had never seen before. Small surveillance cameras, old radios, and various gadgets, each one more intricate and foreign than the last. These weren't ordinary military tools. They were espionage grade, likely worth millions. Her fingers hesitated over a small device with strange symbols etched into its surface. It looked almost like a recorder, but more advanced, designed for something covert. She turned it over in her hands, the weight of its history settling into her bones. These items were buried for a reason. They hadn't just been forgotten, they had been hidden. A soft hum vibrated through the air, breaking her focus. Claire's head snapped up, heart racing. The hum seemed to come from deep within the vault, from one of the machines buried under layers of dust. She stared at the old computers and radios, her mind racing with possibilities. Could they still work? Could these machines be more than just relics? She stepped closer to one of the computers, its screen cracked and covered with a thin layer of grime. The old machinery hummed again, faintly but persistently. Claire's pulse quickened. Something about the sound stirred something deep within her, a feeling she recognized from years of working on old cars. The machines had been dormant, but now something had triggered them. It was as if they were waiting for her to breathe life back into them. Shaking off the sudden unease, Claire scanned the room for anything else that could explain the hum. Her gaze landed on a large metal file cabinet in the corner, partially obscured by a pile of cables. The cabinet was marked with the same Section 7 label, but there was something about it, something different. She couldn't explain it, but the weight of the drawer felt significant. She crossed the room and opened the drawer. Inside, she found a stack of photographs, their edges curling with age. The pictures were grainy, some black and white, others tinged with sepia. They depicted men and women in military uniforms, standing beside strange machinery. A few pictures showed what looked like early prototypes of aircraft or drones. The faces were obscured by shadows, but one image stood out to her. A blurry man standing beside a large, ominous machine, his face only half visible. The photo was marked with a date, 1954. Claire's breath caught. This wasn't just an abandoned vault. It was a treasure chest of Cold War secrets, a relic of a time long forgotten and buried for a reason. She carefully picked up the photograph, and as she did, a small key fell out from behind the frame. It clinked onto the concrete floor, and Claire's stomach tightened. She bent down to pick it up, her mind racing with questions. What did this key open? And what was the next step in uncovering these dangerous secrets? The key was small, worn with time, but its weight in Claire's hand felt like the start of something far larger than her imagination could grasp. She stared at it, the edges smooth from years of use, yet its purpose eluded her. She slipped the key into her pocket for safekeeping and turned her attention back to the photographs. Each one seemed to reveal a different piece of a puzzle, but they only raised more questions. The hum of the vault's machinery still vibrated through the air, low and steady. Claire's instincts told her to be cautious. The vault seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the eerie sense of surveillance pressing in from every angle. She stood at the metal file cabinet, staring at the stacks of documents that sat within. They were more than just papers, they were memories, evidence of something covert, and Claire was about to uncover them. She pulled open another drawer and rifled through the papers. The documents were filled with military jargon, cryptic phrases, and diagrams of machines that made little sense. Some of the pages were yellowed with age, the ink smudged, others perfectly preserved, as though someone had taken care to keep them safe. The further she dug, the clearer it became that these weren't just files about forgotten operations. They were records of highly classified projects, one so secret that the people involved had gone to great lengths to keep them hidden. Among the pages, Claire found a few names that seemed familiar. Project Athena, Operation Orion, Eclipse Protocol. Each title sent a shiver down her spine. These weren't just military operations, they were something else. Something with the potential to change everything. As Claire carefully examined the papers, her eyes narrowed at a particular file marked with a bold red stamp. Top Secret. It contained detailed blueprints of an aircraft, one that appeared to be ahead of its time, with designs that incorporated technology that shouldn't have existed during the Cold War. But what caught her attention wasn't just the aircraft itself, it was the handwritten notes attached to the blueprints. The notes described a series of prototypes, testing phases, and design flaws. But the most alarming part was the mention of sensitive intelligence that needed to be secured at all costs. Claire's fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages, realizing that this wasn't just a forgotten military project. This was a legacy, a dangerous legacy of espionage, secrets, and high-stakes warfare. Her mind raced. Who had been behind these projects? Were the people involved still alive? Or had they disappeared, their names erased from history? And most importantly, what had happened to the equipment stored here? Was it still in use? Or had someone long ago decided to lock it away, never to be seen again? Just as Claire was about to dig deeper into the documents, a noise from the entrance of the vault made her freeze. It was faint, but unmistakable, the sound of footsteps. Someone else was here. Her heart pounded in her chest as she quickly shoved the files back into their drawers. The key in her pocket felt heavier than before. She turned toward the door, her breath shallow, knowing she had to make a choice. The vault was not only filled with secrets, it was filled with danger. Whoever was coming knew something, and they would stop at nothing to ensure that the vault's contents stayed hidden. Claire stood motionless, her breath caught in her throat. The sound of footsteps grew louder, echoing off the steel walls of the vault. Whoever was approaching wasn't trying to hide. They were confident, deliberate, and they were coming straight for her. Her mind raced. Should she hide? Should she try to escape? No. There was no time. The vault was a dead end. If she tried to run, she might lead them right to the equipment she had uncovered. The only choice now was to face whoever was behind the door. She moved quietly to the corner of the room, ducking behind a large stack of crates. The hum from the machine seemed to grow louder as the footsteps approached. Claire's heart hammered in her chest, each beat more frantic than the last. Her hand instinctively went to the key in her pocket. What if they wanted this key? What if they were here for the vault itself? The door creaked open. Claire's pulse quickened as shadows moved into the vault. Two figures entered, their faces obscured by the dim light. One of them spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "Did you find it?" the voice asked, cutting through the stillness. "Yes," another voice replied. "It's all here, just like we were told." Claire's stomach tightened. She had no idea who these people were, but they knew exactly what they were looking for. She peeked around the crates, just enough to see the men. One was tall, with a broad build and a stern, calculating look. The other was shorter, wearing a thick, dark jacket, with sharp, hawk-like eyes that scanned the room methodically. They were armed, their hands resting on the grips of their guns, just in case. Claire froze, trying to steady her breathing. She had to stay hidden. If they found her now, there would be no way out. She was alone, outmatched, and clearly in the wrong place at the wrong time. The tall man took a few steps forward, scanning the room. "It's all here," he said again, sounding satisfied. "We've got what we need. The rest doesn't matter. Keep the vault sealed." His words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Keep the vault sealed? What did that mean? And why did they want it closed? Claire's mind spun. She needed answers, but now wasn't the time to ask questions. She couldn't risk getting caught. She had to get out of here before they noticed her. The men moved deeper into the vault, one of them approaching the files she had just been reading. Claire's hand trembled as she watched. If they saw the documents she'd been going through, it would only confirm her suspicions. They knew everything about the Cold War project. And if they knew that, they would stop at nothing to ensure she didn't get in their way. Just as the shorter man reached the file cabinet, Claire's foot accidentally knocked over a tin can on the ground. The sound was sharp in the silence, a mistake she couldn't undo. The men froze. "Did you hear that?" the tall man asked, turning toward the source of the noise. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She didn't dare move. She had seconds to make a decision. The key in her pocket seemed to burn against her skin. This was no longer about just finding hidden treasure. This was a fight for survival. Whoever these people were, they weren't going to leave her alone. The shorter man took a few cautious steps toward the corner where Claire was hiding. His hand hovered over his gun. Claire's pulse thundered in her ears as the seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. The shorter man's footsteps came closer, and Claire could feel the weight of the moment press down on her. Her heart was hammering in her chest, the sound so loud in her ears that she was certain he could hear it. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to run, but she knew that would be a mistake. There was nowhere to go. The vault was a labyrinth of crates and machinery it would be impossible to hide forever. She needed a plan. Fast. Claire slowly reached for the crowbar in her bag. The tool was heavy in her hands, and she gripped it tightly, hoping it might offer her some sense of control in the chaos unfolding. She held her breath, waiting for the right moment. She had one chance to escape, and she couldn't afford to blow it. The man stepped forward, his silhouette now visible through the cracks in the crates. His gun was lowered, but he was still on edge. Claire could see the faint glow of his flashlight, sweeping over the piles of old equipment. The light passed over her hiding spot, but it didn't stop. She had a fleeting moment of relief before he took another step closer, and she realized that he was only a few feet away now. His hand reached out for a crate. If he turned just a little more, he would see her. Desperation surged within her. She wasn't ready to die, not like this, not for some secret war relic. Claire pushed herself up, her muscles protesting as she crouched and darted toward the back of the vault. The noise of her movement felt deafening in the quiet room, but it was too late to stop now. The men's voices filled the space, their attention momentarily diverted. "Check the documents," the tall man ordered. "If they're gone, we'll need to deal with it." Claire's pulse spiked. They were looking for the files, the one she had just found. She had to get out before they noticed them missing. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she raced for the back of the vault. She could feel the key burning in her pocket, urging her forward. If she could just get to the entrance, she might make it out. But as she reached for the door, it suddenly slammed shut. She froze. Panic surged within her, but she didn't have time to figure out what had happened. They were blocking her exit. Claire spun around, looking for another way out. The machinery behind her hummed louder, the vibrations almost deafening now. It was as though the vault itself was trying to keep her in. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw a vent cover, slightly ajar. It was small, too small for an adult to fit through easily, but it was her only shot. She bolted toward it, crawling under the nearby crates for cover. The footsteps behind her grew closer again, but Claire pushed forward, her hands now slick with sweat. She had to crawl, had to get through that vent. It was a tight squeeze, but it was her only way out. She didn't look back as she slipped through the small opening, the cold metal of the vent scraping against her arms as she wriggled forward. When she finally pulled herself through the narrow shaft, she was outside the vault. Claire gasped for air, relieved that she had escaped. But as she stood up and backed away, her gaze fell on the shadowy figures inside the vault, still searching. They hadn't noticed her exit. Claire took a deep breath and ran. Claire didn't stop running. Her legs burned as she sprinted through the overgrown military base, the familiar landscape now an eerie maze of rusted equipment and crumbling structures. Her breath was ragged, each inhale sharp and shallow, But she couldn't afford to slow down. She had to get out not just for her own sake, but for whatever it was she had uncovered in that vault. She hadn't seen the two men's faces, but their voices had been unmistakable. They weren't ordinary soldiers or government agents. No, they were something else, something far more dangerous. The cold certainty in their words, the way they spoke about dealing with it, made it clear that the stakes were much higher than Claire had anticipated. Her hand instinctively gripped the key in her pocket. She had no idea what it unlocked, but something deep inside her told her that this key was her lifeline. Whoever those men were, they didn't just want the equipment in the vault. They were after something specific. The key felt like the missing piece of the puzzle, and she was determined to figure out its purpose before anyone else could get to it. But Claire's escape wasn't as smooth as she had hoped. As she rounded a corner of the base, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. They were following her, just as she had feared. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she pushed herself harder. She couldn't let them catch up. She needed a plan, something to throw them off her trail. She glanced around, looking for a way to disappear into the landscape, but the base was too open, too exposed. There were no safe corners to hide in, no buildings she could slip into. Her eyes locked onto a small, dilapidated warehouse in the distance. It wasn't much, but it offered cover. She veered toward it, ducking low behind the thick vegetation that surrounded the structure. She moved as quietly as she could, praying that the shadows would shield her. The footsteps grew louder as the men drew closer. Claire's pulse quickened. She had no idea how far behind they were, but she didn't dare look back. If they saw her head into the warehouse, they would know exactly where she was. She couldn't risk it. She pressed her back against the crumbling wall of the warehouse, peering around the corner. The men were now only a few dozen yards away, their voices drifting through the air. "You check the east side," the tall man ordered. "I'll cover the west. She can't be far." Claire's stomach churned. She was being hunted, and they were closing in. But there was a small, narrow window on the side of the warehouse. It wasn't much, but it was her only chance. She darted toward it, slipping through the crack with practiced ease. The window creaked as she climbed inside, but she didn't dare linger. The interior of the warehouse was dark and musty, the air thick with the smell of mildew and rust. Once inside, Claire crouched low, listening for any sign of the men outside. The minutes seemed to stretch on forever as she waited, her heart still racing in her chest. Every tiny sound felt like a threat. But after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps faded. She wasn't out of danger yet. They were still looking for her, but for the moment, she was safe. Claire took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. She needed to keep moving, but she had no idea where to go next. The key was still burning a hole in her pocket, and she had no intention of letting it fall into the wrong hands. The stakes had just gotten much higher, and Claire was determined to uncover the truth no matter what it took. Claire took one last look through the broken window of the warehouse before slipping deeper into its dark interior. The cold, musty air inside the building felt like a blanket, smothering the adrenaline that still pumped through her veins. Her breath was shallow, but she tried to steady herself. She had to think. She couldn't afford to panic. She had no idea what she was supposed to do next, but the key in her pocket was like a weight on her chest, a constant reminder that she had uncovered something far bigger than herself. There was no going back now. She moved quietly through the abandoned warehouse, her footsteps muffled by the layers of dust on the floor. Broken crates and long-forgotten machinery were scattered around, their outlines barely visible in the low light. As Claire passed by the stacks of rusted metal, her fingers brushed against the key in her pocket. It seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, urging her to keep going, to figure out what it opened. Her mind raced. What did the key unlock? What was the vault protecting? There had been nothing about a key in the documents she had seen. She had searched through every file, but nothing had pointed to this crucial piece of the puzzle. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that the key was the key to it all, literally and figuratively. She glanced around the warehouse once more, looking for anything that could help her make sense of it. The walls were covered in faded blueprints, old maps of the military base, and what looked like engineering schematics. One set of drawings caught her eye, a map of the base's underground tunnels. There was a section marked D7 Access, the same as the vault she had found earlier. It was part of the same system, and judging by the map, it led deeper into the facility. Her pulse quickened. The vault had been hidden away for a reason, and now she knew there was more beneath it. The vault wasn't just a storage space for forgotten spy equipment. It was a part of something larger, something that had been buried for decades. And it wasn't just a relic of the past. It was connected to the present, to the men who were still looking for it. Claire knew that if she didn't act fast, they would catch up with her. The tall man and his partner had been getting closer, and they would find her sooner or later. She needed to move. She quickly folded the map and stuffed it into her jacket, then grabbed a few more papers from the warehouse desk. If she was going to survive this, she needed to know everything. She needed answers, and she had to be smart about how she got them. With the map in hand and her nerves steeled, Claire slipped through a back door of the warehouse, which led to a narrow alleyway. She paused for a moment, listening. No sounds. But she wasn't about to take chances. The base's layout was a maze, but the tunnels beneath it were her best bet. Claire had no idea what awaited her down there, but she knew one thing for sure: if she didn't figure out the truth soon, she might not get another chance. The air in the alleyway was thick with dampness, and Claire could feel the weight of the shadows pressing in on her. Every step she took echoed, and the stillness was only broken by the distant hum of the base's forgotten machines. The map she had taken from the warehouse was clenched tightly in her hand, her fingers tracing the lines that led to the underground tunnels. This was her best shot at getting answers, and she was determined to follow the path. She moved quickly but carefully, keeping her head low as she navigated the dark, crumbling alley. The map indicated that the entrance to the tunnels was nearby, hidden behind an old service door marked only with the faintest traces of yellow paint. She had to move fast. She knew they were still searching for her, and it wouldn't be long before they realized she had slipped away. The entrance was just ahead. The door was rusty and old, the handle practically falling off, but to Claire's surprise, it gave way with a creak. Inside was a narrow staircase leading downward, swallowed by complete darkness. Claire hesitated for a moment, her breath caught in her throat. Something about the tunnel felt like the last step she could take before plunging into the unknown, but there was no turning back. She stepped inside, the door creaking closed behind her with an unsettling finality. The stairwell descended deeper, and Claire's heart raced as she felt the temperature drop with every step. Her flashlight flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls of the concrete passage. The sound of her footsteps was muffled, but it wasn't the silence that unnerved her. It was the feeling that the walls themselves were watching her, waiting for her to uncover their long-buried secrets. The tunnels were ancient, their purpose long forgotten, but it was clear they had once been something important. The walls were lined with faded markings, rusted pipes snaking through the concrete like veins. The further Claire descended, the more the weight of history seemed to press in on her. She wasn't just walking through a forgotten military base. She was stepping into a dark chapter of the past. At the bottom of the stairs, the tunnel stretched out in front of her, dimly lit by a series of flickering overhead bulbs. The map she had taken from the warehouse indicated that she wasn't far from her destination. She had a feeling the deeper she went, the closer she would get to whatever secret this place was hiding. The cold draft that swept through the tunnel made her shiver, but it was more than just the chill in the air. It was the unmistakable sense of something buried, something locked away for far too long. Claire took a deep breath and pushed forward, her steps becoming more confident with each passing moment. The map guided her through the winding passageways, and she kept her eyes on the walls, looking for any sign that would tell her she was heading in the right direction. The tunnels twisted and turned, and the silence grew oppressive. It felt as though the air itself had been held captive here, waiting for someone to uncover it. And then, just as the map promised, Claire reached the end, a heavy steel door that stood like a sentinel in the dark. It was sealed tight, but the lock on it was old, its mechanism worn down with time. the key in her pocket pressed against her side like a burning reminder of everything she had fought for. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The steel door loomed in front of Claire, dark and imposing. It was like a sentinel, watching her every move, standing in the way of whatever lay hidden in the depths of the base. The key in her pocket seemed to grow heavier with every passing second, almost as though it was alive, urging her to unlock the door and reveal the secrets locked inside. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, the chill of the underground air making her skin prickle. Her heart was hammering in her chest. This was it. There was no turning back now. Everything she had uncovered: the Cold War vault, the mysterious equipment, the men who had chased her had led her here, to this moment. Whatever lay beyond this door had the power to change everything. Claire slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly, turning with a soft click. The mechanism creaked as the door slowly opened, revealing a small, dimly lit room beyond. Claire stepped inside, her flashlight illuminating the room as she took in the sight before her. The room was empty, save for a large, metal cabinet against the far wall. It looked out of place, sleek and modern compared to the decaying walls and rusted pipes around it. The cabinet was locked, its surface unmarred by the passage of time. It was almost as though it had been placed here just for her to find. Claire moved toward it, her flashlight shaking in her hand as she took a closer look. There were no markings on the cabinet, no signs of what it might contain, but she knew this was it. This was what she had been searching for. Her fingers brushed against the surface, cold and smooth to the touch. The cabinet door was locked with a high-tech security mechanism, but Claire wasn't about to let that stop her. She had seen enough of these systems to know how they worked. The key she had was only the beginning. Now, she needed to disable the security. Her hands worked quickly, pulling tools from her bag as she knelt beside the cabinet. The hum of machinery echoed through the room, the air thick with the anticipation of what was to come. She knew that every moment she spent here increased the risk of being caught. The men from the vault would be looking for her, and they were probably close now. But Claire didn't have the luxury of waiting. With a quick flick of her wrist, the security system buzzed, and the lock clicked open. Claire stood up, her breath shallow, and pulled the cabinet door open. What she saw inside made her stomach lurch. Rows of files, neatly organized and stacked in perfect order. But it wasn't just the files that caught her attention. It was the other items, pieces of technology, that she couldn't even begin to identify. Old, but advanced. Wires, blueprints, and a series of photographs depicting men and women in government uniforms, standing beside equipment she had only seen in classified reports. But there was something even more unsettling in the cabinet. At the very back, hidden beneath the papers, was a box. A small, unmarked box with a faded emblem. Claire carefully lifted it, her hands trembling as she opened it. Inside, there was a single photograph, yellowed with age. It was of a young man in a military uniform, standing proudly next to a piece of equipment she recognized. But the man's face, it was familiar. Claire couldn't place it, but there was something haunting about his expression. She stared at the photograph for a long time. It felt like a key not just to the vault, but to everything that had happened here. The man in the photograph was the missing piece to the puzzle, and now Claire had to find out who he was before the men following her discovered it first. The photograph shook in Claire's hands as she stared at the man's face, trying to make sense of the haunting familiarity that tugged at her memory. She had seen his face before, though she couldn't quite place it. His uniform, though old, was immaculate, and the equipment beside him looked almost futuristic. The photograph was taken in the same underground base she could tell by the distinctive architecture of the walls and the equipment that surrounded them. Her heart raced as she turned the photo over, desperate to find any clue that could help her understand the connection. The back was marked with a single line of text: Agent 47, the last of Section 7. Her mind swirled. Section 7. It was the name that had haunted her ever since she found the vault, the label stamped on every crate and every file she had uncovered. But what did it mean? And why had this Agent 47 been part of it? More importantly, why had they been erased from history? Claire felt a cold chill creep up her spine as a memory surfaced, a fleeting moment from her childhood. Her father had been a history buff, always telling stories about the Cold War and the secret operations that had been carried out during that time. She remembered how he had once mentioned an operation, something so classified that no one outside the government knew about it. He had called it the Last Project, and it had been buried for years. Could this Agent 47 have been part of it? Was this man tied to the secret legacy of Section 7? Her thoughts were interrupted by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. The men from the vault. They were getting closer. Claire quickly shoved the photograph back into the box, her hands trembling. She had to move, and fast. She couldn't let them get their hands on it, on him. The photograph held the key to everything, and if they found it, they would stop at nothing to erase it all over again. She turned to the cabinet, scanning it one last time. The files, the technology, it was all too much to take in. But Claire knew she couldn't carry it all with her. She grabbed a few more papers from the cabinet, stuffing them into her bag, then closed the door with a soft click. There was no time to waste. She turned and bolted for the exit, her heart pounding in her chest. The tunnels seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in as the sound of her pursuers' footsteps echoed in the distance. She couldn't keep running forever, but she had to try. She reached the stairwell, her legs burning with exhaustion, and scrambled back up to the surface. The night air hit her like a slap in the face, but she didn't stop to take a breath. She ran. Weaving through the old base, her mind focused on one thing: getting the truth out. As she emerged from the base, the distant sound of engines roared to life behind her. They were closing in, but Claire had already made it. She had the evidence, the key to unlocking everything. And with it, she knew her life would never be the same. The secrets of Section 7, the hidden legacy of Agent 47, and the mysterious technology had been buried for too long. But now, Claire Jensen was the one holding the keys to history. And she would stop at nothing to uncover the truth, no matter what the cost.